I am on the OWASP board. I've been dutifully serving there for the last 2 years. It's been a great time. We are here for everyone online in the Mozilla office in Paris. We've got a great room of attendees here today. And we've got a talk that Paul's going to give us later today, just a few minutes, about Firefox OS. Before we jump into things, I want to do a few just kind of OWASP announcements. First off, thanks so much to Sebastian, Ludo, and also Ivan, who set up this event. It's really great to be out here. Mozilla does tons with OWASP, but we're happy to provide space and really excited to be here. A few other interesting things. For those, first off, who here is this your first OWASP event or OWASP meeting? Oh, great. Yeah, a good handful of people. Awesome. Well, we hope you enjoy. You'd be surprised to know that OWASP is actually in almost 200 countries around the world. Pretty amazing for a nonprofit organization. You know, as you know, our mission is just to make application security visible, which using the word "just" is probably an understatement. A huge challenge for us all. But having that kind of grassroots support in over 200 countries, we have a mailing list of individuals involved nearing 30,000 people. And for those of you that are in this field, I imagine you know there's not tons of people in the security field, so it's a pretty good reach for a very targeted area of application security. The other thing I'm curious about, who here is, so we have a few different things, developers or security professionals. Who here is a developer? That's your full-time, manage a team or a developer? Okay, a couple of people. And what about like security pen testers or run security programs? Okay. Okay. There's a bunch of people that didn't raise their hand. What other areas do we have represented here today?
Master engineering students.
Okay. Great. Great.
I come from OWASP Ecuador.
OWASP Ecuador.
We were in France, and I was searching for some projects.
Great. Great.
I'm a lawyer actually, and became a pen tester.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. We're good. Well, a couple other quick updates. So I mentioned the OWASP board. One thing that's coming up in just the next month is the OWASP Global Board elections. So if you are a registered member of OWASP, you can take part in that and help vote for the next OWASP board. If you're not a member, it's $50 if you want to join. And you can do that for the next week or two. There's a cutoff date for the election. The OWASP board is made up of 6 or 7 people. The bylaws allow actually between 6 and 8, I believe, or maybe it's 5 and 7. But we'll be voting in 4 more people. 3 people are up for election, and 1 more spot is being added. So I encourage you to take a look at the information online about the OWASP board. I am running as well, so if you want to read up more about me or just chat with me about what I believe in for OWASP, then please do. But I do encourage you to get involved and take a look at that. It's definitely a great organization. And also, as you're getting more involved in OWASP, some of you said this is your first meeting, the projects at OWASP, the community, everything is free and open. So if you see something that you want to participate in, something strikes your interest tonight or online, just send an email to the mailing list or jump on. Everything's very open, and the idea is to get here at OWASP giving the best and brightest views on many different topics. So aside from that, we'll go ahead and get started, and really excited to have you all here, and really happy to be here at in Mozilla volunteering the space for everyone. So look forward to that.
Bear with me for a second while I share this slides for everyone. Can you see that on the screen? There? Okay. All right. Just get. Do I need this? Yes, I see. Okay. Waving me off. Okay. Welcome everyone to OWASP. My name's Paul Theriault. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and I'm really pleased to be here in Paris tonight. I am Australian. I will do my best to enunciate my verbs and try and speak clearly, especially there's a bit of an echo here. If something isn't clear, please feel free to shout out and ask questions. I'm hoping this is a bit of an interactive session. The plan tonight is to give you a bit of an introduction into Firefox OS and to talk about the security of Firefox OS and some of the challenges that we faced when with building a mobile operating system that's based on web technologies. And hopefully this will pique your interest and you'll want to learn more about Firefox OS and more about the mobile web. So without further ado, let's get started. So I gather that most of you aren't developers, so I'll try and keep it fairly high level, but again, any questions, just let me know. So first of all, what is Firefox OS? Firefox OS is designed to be a web-based operating system for mobile space. It's got a couple of objectives. The first one is we're trying to make the web on mobile compete with native technologies. So you may have, people here may have Android phones or iPhones or some other device that has native apps that they download and install on the device. You probably also have browsers running on those devices. Part of the philosophy with Firefox OS is you shouldn't need to have separate apps and native apps and have this distinction between the web and the apps on the phone. The web should be as powerful as native on the phone. And we're enabling this by creating new APIs and new, I guess, powers for the web to be able to do the same sort of things and have the same sort of experience, or as good an experience, maybe not a same experience, maybe something better. But that's one of the objectives of Firefox OS. Another objective of Firefox OS is to bring the internet to places where it's not available currently. So the target market for Firefox OS is generally developing countries where you have a lot of like mobile internet infrastructure, and these are people who are coming to the internet for the first time, and they'll be coming to the internet via mobile. So this is a great opportunity to reach out to those people and welcome them to the web and get them involved and help them shape what the experience is like for them. So I'm going to go through a little bit about, first of all, the structure of what Firefox OS is at a little bit of a technical level, just so you kind of understand the concept. So first of all, Firefox OS is basically a user interface. So I have a device here. So you probably can't see that from there. I would switch to a demo, but I think I'm going to lose the stream. So we're just going to have to look for a file. It looks like a phone. It has an interface. Everything that you actually see in the interface, so all the buttons, all the menus, all the widgets, are all written in HTML. Or HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, so technologies of the web. It's basically Firefox. When Firefox OS starts up, you get a just enough Android, Linux sort of base to launch a Firefox instance, and then once that gets running, then it boots up a web page, and then that shows you the UI. Apps themselves are actually just iframes running inside that. So you basically have this one big web page that then somehow gets navigated. And so that user interface is called Gaia. Underneath Gaia, you have what's generally referred to as Gecko, and that's essentially Firefox. It's basically Firefox without any UI, but then with added features and new APIs to support mobile technologies. And then the third layer underneath Gecko is, we call it Gonk. It's very similar, I mean, it's basically Linux. It has components of Android, and then some other components that we've written to sort of glue everything together. And then the last piece of the puzzle is the actual apps themselves. And that's, I guess, what I mainly want to get people thinking about tonight, and have a think and understanding the security model of. Okay, so I was going to dive into these technically, but I think I'll just talk about them. So if you're interested in the runtime or what you see for Firefox OS, you can pop onto GitHub and you can start browsing through the code. It's basically a repository of HTML, JavaScript, and CSS files, and it's quite well, relatively simple in just to skim through the code, unlike any other mobile operating system. Like you can look into the code that does the drop-down menu for when you get an SMS, and you can see, oh, okay, it's doing that. And if you want to, you can change it, and you can update how it works. And that's one of the key ideas with the phone, is having it open and hackable. As I was talking about with Gecko, so Gecko, we've added these new APIs. So that's things like, there's a few examples there. The first one there is a web API to make a phone call. And that's as simple as it is to actually make a phone call on the device. You just call navigator.telephony.dial and then add some phone number. Likewise, we've added APIs to do things like open sockets, access the photos on the device, take photos with a camera, record audio, and everything that you'd expect from a mobile operating system. Gecko does a few other things. It also talks from when Gecko needs to talk to Gaia. There's a bunch of messaging that happens between there that, if you're interested, you can have a look in this shell.js file. It also has communication with the underlying mobile phone infrastructure. So you have things like, is anyone familiar with Android at all, like the lower layers of Android? Maybe not. Well, basically, there's a bunch of daemons that talk to things like the modem for making phone calls, or talks to Bluetooth, things like that. And then so Gecko has extra glue to sort of glue them together. And then lastly, we have the lowest layer, which I mentioned before. Okay, so Firefox OS web apps. This is probably the most crucial part. A web app is essentially a web page. In fact, for the most part, web apps are literally web pages. You host them on a web server. You can write them in whatever technologies you're currently using to write websites. The only difference is you need to just create one extra file called a manifest file. And this manifest file describes certain attributes of the application. So it says the name of the application. It says it describes the icon, so what the user will see when they install it, and what the icon on the home screen looks like for them. And then it has a bunch of other things like the permissions that this app is going to need, or it has a thing called web activities, which I'll talk about a bit later, and that allows apps to communicate with each other and ask each other to do different sorts of tasks. But the key thing here is that the most basic form of an app is literally just a website with an additional file. This additional file, the location of this file, is the definition of the app. So when you install an app, it becomes defined by wherever this manifest file is installed from. It has to be installed, so that's a bit of a difference from the web. You know, on the web we're thinking about, we search engine, we click a link, we end up on a website. This is more of an app sort of methodology where you go to a marketplace, you install an app, it then gets installed on the device. And finally, it can be hosted locally. The alternative for that is sometimes you might want the app to be running when it's on, when the app is not plugged into the internet. You have two options for this. One, you can use HTML5 app cache. Has anyone heard of app cache? Some people nodding their heads. So app cache allows you to cache files so that the website will work when the phone is offline. So that works just the same on the phone. In fact, we've actually added some extra features to make it more app-like. So when you install an app, for example, it pre-downloads the cache, which is important because you often might install an app maybe at home, and then you go outside and you get on a bus, and if we hadn't already pre-cached those resources, then the app wouldn't work until the first time you actually visited the website, which wouldn't be so helpful. The other option for installing an app that will work without a phone connection is what's called a packaged app. Now, if anyone's familiar with Firefox OS add-ons, this is actually very similar to that sort of concept. We have a zip file, and inside the zip file you have the same HTML, JavaScript, CSS. And I'll get a little bit into detail of why that's really important later on. Well, it's actually this point here. So the first challenge, who here feels that it's okay if a web page can make phone calls right now? Who feels comfortable with web page making phone calls? Okay, no hands raised. I mean, it's pretty clear. The web is an untrusted model, right? You browse the web, you go to a website. Okay, maybe you have some trust in the domain that you're going to. Maybe you trust your banking website to, with your banking password, and you hope that maybe you don't get phished, and maybe you trust your email provider. Maybe you don't trust your email provider, but you don't have much of a choice. Anyway, what we want to do here is we want to start giving really powerful permissions to the web, which at the first glance is kind of crazy talk. So we needed to figure out a way of how do we start instilling trust in the web. And the model that we have at the moment is basically 3 levels. We have regular web apps, and they run with the model of the web. They are more or less untrusted, at least from a permission model perspective. You have the regular web security controls. So, for example, you can't access the file system. You can't make, you can't do anything that's going to delete data or access like SMS or anything that's going to cost the user money. So this is basically, and the idea of Firefox OS is most web apps can probably be like that. That's all you ever need. If you're going to make a game like on the phone, you can probably just do that as a web app. You shouldn't need to have extended privileges. So that's where we're trying to get to. The next level up is privileged applications. And so these applications are applications which they have a bit of trust. And these are the apps that can start potentially doing bad things to you. They can do things like they can read your contacts, they can read your gallery or your image gallery, sorry, or they can look at audio. They can make network requests that are not usually acceptable. Same origin. These apps are allowed to bypass same origin, and we do some things to make it safe for that. But by and large, they're a bit more powerful. And these applications are, how do we protect them? So first of all, they're reviewed by the Mozilla Marketplace. They have to be a packaged app. So when I was talking before about the difference between hosted and packaged, if you want to be a privileged app and get access to these more powerful APIs, you need to be a packaged app that goes to the store, it gets reviewed, and then it gets signed by the marketplace, and only then can it be on the phone. We apply a CSP policy. Has anyone heard of CSP? Does anyone not know what CSP is? Same group of people? Okay. Content security policy. Content security policy is a technology which it was originally intended to prevent things like XSS, and it does so by you specify a whitelist of where you're allowed to load code from. And so what we do with these privileged apps is we enforce a whitelist of saying you can only load the code that was shipped with our package. So it stops people loading external JavaScript resources, and it stops people injecting script into pages and like script tags or event handlers or all the common types of issues that cause cross-site scripting. There's some implications of that. That means you can't, so it makes it hard to do things like, if you want to do, for example, third-party analytics software, that often relies on including third-party script. That's not going to work in this model. So what you have to do is actually, you can set up a separate frame to load those things, or you can include them in your packaged app. But basically, for the parts that have access to the permissions, this has to be reviewed prior to being installed. So this is a bit of a shift for web applications, and that's how we sort of end up with this increased level of trust. A, it's reviewed, and B, it can't be changed dynamically. So that's sort of the properties that we're introducing there. And the third part here, these are certified apps, and these are sort of, I guess these are born out of necessity of, there are some permissions that allow you to do really, really bad things, or really, really dangerous things. So that's things like you can add and remove all applications. You can delete all the data from the system, well, app data, I mean. You can what's other things? You can change the settings, like for example, you can read the passcode used to unlock the phone. You can do a bunch of stuff. And so those sort of APIs, they're the APIs that are intended for the system app, or the apps that are shipped with the phone. And these permissions are only available to the apps that ship with the phone. You can't install an app that then gets the access to these applications. One thing I will say, though, is that there are a lot of APIs that are in the certified. They're in there more because we haven't figured out exactly what the best way to expose these to developers is yet. And I think over time, basically what the goal of the security model for Firefox OS is to try and expose more and more of these APIs to web content, but in a secure manner. And that's really, finding that balance is really the challenge. To give you a bit of an indication of some of the APIs that you can and can't. So privileged apps can get access to alarms, TCP sockets, contacts, stuff that is probably privacy related, but not necessarily, like, not really bad, or not really serious in terms of costing the user money or things like that. Some of the things like web SMS, web telephony, so sending premium SMS messages or making phone calls, that's going to cost the user money. So at the moment, apps themselves aren't allowed to make those, to use those APIs. Now we got a lot of pushback from developers when we first started this, right? Because they're like, hey, I want to make my super duper, SMS app that integrates with Facebook and whatever else, and we want to encourage that. But at the same time, we've basically started, I guess, in a fairly conservative way, and we're working on ways to try and expose these in a secure way to other applications. One of the ways we're trying to do that is, instead of providing direct access to the APIs themselves, we provide access via user-mediated access via web activities. So for example, if a web page wants to send them SMS, well, that might be totally legitimate. There are plenty of use cases for why a web page would want to send an SMS. So the way we do that is the web page is allowed to ask, oh, I want to send an SMS, or I want to send a message. The user then gets a pop-up. It's like a thing that comes up from the bottom of the screen, and the user can then choose how they want to send a message. And if they want to send via SMS, they tap on the SMS app, and you get a shift from the web page to the SMS app. And at this point, the user can see the SMS message, they can see the number it's being sent to, and then they can send it if they want to. So that way, and then once that's done, it then returns back to the original application with a success or failure kind of message. So that way we expose some of these APIs, but in a mediated kind of way. And there's a list of activities there. Once the slides are shared, you can click on those and have a look at. There's a whole variety of web activities. So there's everything from even making phone calls to starting a link, sharing a picture, choosing a picture. And in fact, web apps can design their own web activities. So if you have a web app which provides a widget for a game, another app can say, oh, I want a game widget. And your app can say, hey, I can give you one of those, and it's quite similar to the Intense model on Android, but a bit more lightweight. You can't ask a specific application. It's all user mediated, so that the user is in control of where you're going in between the applications. Okay, challenge number 2. So give users control while protecting them. So this is a lot to do with the permissions. So if we go quickly back here, so you see there's a whole range of permissions here. Now, who has an Android phone here? Good people. How does it make you feel when you go and you install an app from the marketplace and it says, I want access to your contacts, I'm going to need to send some SMS, and if I could make full internet connections, yeah, that'd be great, and I'm just a game. And you have a choice, right? You have to go yes or no. The model we're taking is, the We're not going to you shouldn't have to make those choices. First of all, the end user doesn't know what, like most of these permissions, hell, I mean, I'm going to have trouble explaining some of these permissions. So if I'm going to have trouble explaining some of these permissions to you, how can the end user be expected to do that? The approach we take is only give users choices where they can make real choices. So that's mainly things where they have a privacy impact. That's generally what it boils down to, but not always. But so things like geolocation, I mean, that's something that's already on the web, and you already make a choice about that. But things like contacts, access to your image galleries, other things like that where you can say, do you want this app to have access to my photos? It's a simple question, and the user can make that choice. But we don't do that choice when you install the app. When you install the app just gets installed. Actually, there is no visibility of the permissions, it just gets installed. But when the app later comes back to access the API that it wants to access, at that point, the first time you use that API, then at that point the user gets prompted. And because there's only about, I think there's about 6 or 7 different permissions at the moment. There aren't too many, so that you're bombarded with permission prompts. The other thing that this allows to do is app developers can design their app in such a way that the permission prompt is intuitive into the flow. So for example, if I go to a Maps application and I hit a button which says, find me on a map, at that point, it makes sense for the user to ask a question of, oh, is this app allowed to use geolocation? Because they're expecting it. They're in a Maps application. But if you had to make that decision upon install, you might say, oh, I don't know, yes, okay. And then later on, you forget the fact that you've given it geolocation, and then the app is tracking you. And so the idea is when you get prompted, if it's an untrusted app, it's not remembered by default, but you can choose to remember it if you trust that app. Applications, we feel they're a bit default, but you're still in control. If you accidentally granted something, or if you change your mind later, you can go into the settings and you can change. Ivan, if I switch here on this, the web people aren't going to be able to see what I'm doing, are they? I was going to do some demos, but maybe I'll leave the demos to the end and I'll see if I can switch to the actual window. I'll see if I can do that. We maybe have the technology.
Just a question. What's going on? Let's assume that you install your context into a mobile that is not what it's supposed to be.
Yes.
You install correctly on the process. How do your code react when something within part of the operating system tries to trigger an API on behalf of another thing part of the operating system that was not granted during the install? In here, and they simulate.
Sure. So I think the question was, how do we react if one part of the system attempts to access an API for which it hasn't been granted?
Either doing the installation in order to ensure that the initial code isn't tempered or modified during the
Sure.
or afterwards, that an API is called on the right way.
So the permissions themselves are actually built into the APIs for the most part. So when you access the API, there's a permission check usually every time, or at least every time you get the initial object. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there's something a little bit different about Firefox OS than regular Firefox. First of all, there's a special flag for the iframes that we run the apps in, and it means apps actually run in a separate process. They don't run in the same single process. So they have a separate process, and those processes are actually associated with permissions. And there's an IPC mechanism that goes back and forth between the child process and the parent process, and the parent process does the enforcing. So if you have a different child process, so let's say you have an app that maybe it gets compromised, and it manages to then ask for maybe the telephony API, it will have to send a message back to the parent to ask to make a phone call, and at that point, the parent will make an assertion that, oh, this child doesn't have access to that API, and it will actually kill the child, because it knows that that child shouldn't ever even ask for that permission, so it controls it that way. So yeah, but no, good question. So to show you, let me see if I can find an example of a prompt. Oops. That's a web activity, by the way. So that there is, I held my finger down on the home screen and it said, where do I want to set my back wallpaper from? But let me see if I can find blind. Actually, this one should have them. Okay, so that's an example of what the permission prompt looks like for a regular web app. This is for the geolocation, and you can see you can decide to, oh, I'm going to say, I trust this app, I'm going to allow. And then I was like, oh, wait, no, this isn't the app that I thought it was. So, okay, so I can go to my settings app, and I can go back and go app permissions, and down to Montana Maps. And so currently it's set to grant. I can say deny, or I can say, oh, well, next time you can ask me again. And so that's, and if there were other permissions here that you would get asked about, they would show up here as well. Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah. So the tool that I'm using here, I encourage all of you to install. If you search for Firefox OS Simulator, it's literally just an add-on for Firefox. So you can just go into Firefox, search for Firefox OS Simulator, click a button, and it will install it. You'll get something like this dashboard. I'm sorry, web folks, you're not going to be able to see this, but for the benefit of the people in the room, it's as simple as starting it up like that. And what we actually have here on the left is, so Firefox running the dashboard. On the right, this is Firefox OS. But because Firefox OS is basically Firefox, you can compile it for multiple platforms. So this is Firefox OS compiled for Mac. You will note that if you try and do something like make a phone call, it's going to struggle because it's, well, it's not a phone. But maybe one day. Okay. Let me switch back to slides. All right. So that's permission check. So that's the difference between the explicit permissions. Now there's also a bunch of other permissions that we don't ask the user for. So if we don't ask the user, how do we justify granting those permissions? Well, that's what the review process is for in the marketplace. Developers are required to declare why they want to use a permission, and part of the review process is examining the API calls to try and understand if a developer is using permission in the manner to which they're describing. This is going to be a big challenge going forward. Because we're certainly not under any impression that doing JavaScript obfuscation is very easy. Doing JavaScript code review is very difficult. So I would imagine that going forward, at the moment, the marketplace is still growing. So we have the resources to do quite detailed reviews. As it grows, we're going to need to get smarter, and there's a lot of things we're doing around automated analysis, developing tools. There's a whole bunch of things that we're investigating, possibly developer reputation systems, and to basically prioritize which apps get reviewed and therefore which apps can get permissions. But these are all sort of still in the infant early stages. Yep, sure.
You say that actually apps work in different APIs work in different processes.
Yep.
I was wondering about it's actually this Firefox OS using. Can you share libraries? And if it's using GeoGeo stuff or it's using binary libraries, I don't know. What are you using?
Underneath everything?
Yeah, exactly. Libraries
I am not the best person to answer that question.
Because that's I wonder about the already process, but then how actually the dependency working underneath?
You'd probably get a much more intelligent answer off the B2G list. So the question was the details of what libraries are used underneath Firefox OS. Yeah, I'm not the best person to answer that question, but yeah, either the hash B2G channel on IRC or the list itself. Or there's also fairly good documentation on NBN as well around the sandboxing process, how child processes are spawned, and the architecture and things like that.
Agencies know, but
Look, if you look up Firefox, that has some details.
give up the hash channels.
Sure. Okay. All right. Okay. So another thing we want to do is we want to protect apps from each other. How are we going for time? Okay. One thing that we want to do, so apps, we try and give a fair amount of free rein to apps. Apps are basically, they could be iframes, but they could even have browsers built into them themselves. So you might have a situation where one app opens a certain website, maybe, I don't know, your email account or something. Maybe another website also opens that same website. But in a normal browser, you would have cookies shared between everything, right? And if you're logged into your email in one window, your cookies are shared across windows. That's a bit risky from an app perspective, especially when we have apps that are very powerful shared with apps that are very untrusted. So that is a recipe for danger. So what we have on the phone is actually an extended origin model, so that every app it's like it's opened in its own private browser. So it has its own cookies, it has its own origin-based resources, it has its own IndexedDB, has its own everything that's controlled by origin is separated on an app level basis. Except if you go into the browser, the tabs within the browser share the tabs in the same way that you would expect for a normal browser. This is a very high-level picture of the API that I was kind of alluding to earlier in terms of the architecture. We have the Gaia layer, which is a web app, which is essentially HTML, JavaScript, CSS. I should emphasize that actually. Apps are entirely HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. There's no binary components, there's no plugins. There is talk of add-ons, and I know that's something that we're desiring for the future, is to figure out how we can do that, but that doesn't exist at the moment. The apps themselves run out of process, and when they want to do something like talk to an API, they have to ask the parent, hey, I want to talk to the SMS, I want to send an SMS via the modem, or I want to read images off the SD card. If you search for security model on MDN, that's where this picture comes from, and there's a lot more detail if you're interested in diving into understanding that further. Okay, I'm just going to go through a quick, a few mobile-specific threats. So one of the big differences between Firefox on your phone and Firefox on your desktop is, well, I mean, maybe not. I can see a lot of laptops in the room, so maybe my point isn't so valid. But you can lose your phone very easily. And so how do we protect against that? So the main protection is we follow a similar model to Android. The data that for app data is protected inside in this case it's the Firefox profile, and it's not readable without root access. Apps themselves don't have access to the file system. But one of the big challenges that we're facing, and I think where it would be really interesting to see where we can come up with some creative solutions, is on one hand we want to make a device which is open and hackable. We want to be able people to open up and change how the device works and do really cool things. The flip side is we also want to protect the end users who don't really want to do that. They just want a phone. And so that's quite an interesting challenge. And I expect the direction that we'll go with that is making it so that developers don't need root access in order to do all of the cool things that they want to do. One of the really exciting things that's just being released is a thing called App Manager, which is basically, has anyone played with Firefox OS developer tool? Firefox developer tools on desktop? It's a whole suite of tools that allows you to do debugging web pages, and you get nice tools that help you with layout and all sorts of stuff like that. They're actually going to work on the phone now as well. So you can do things like you can push apps to the phone, you can debug apps, you can You can actually even do live editing of the phone, which is super, super cool. So you can, basically what happens is you press inspect on your desktop, and then your screen highlights, and then you tap the area of the screen where you want to edit. It gets loaded in your desktop, and you edit it, and it live updates on your phone, which is really just amazing to see. And that's the sort of exciting stuff that we want to bring to the phone. But yeah, it's a challenge from a security perspective, because with power comes, you know, a lot of security risks. So. Limited UI is also a big challenge on mobile. Apps don't have any Chrome, so UI Chrome, like there's no address bar. If there's no address bar, how do you tell the user that that page that they're loading over is SSL? That's a really big challenge. There are other things like how does the user know where they are? And that's one of the things that we've, like, if you're able to trust apps, you need to know that you're in a certain app. So when we have things like web activities that switch between the two, that's why we have this model where the user is involved in that switch, because otherwise they might not be aware that now they're in their banking app instead of or now they're in the web app, they're in their browser instead of their banking app or whatever. And then also having the user involved in critical security decisions. So that's the prompting that I mentioned earlier. And finally, malware prevention. I've kind of touched a little bit on this already, but you know, the mobile space is growing very rapidly. There's no reason to expect that Firefox OS is going to be any more immune from the types of threats that we've seen in the Android store and also in iPhone. So the permission model, so having, like, the way we're dealing with it is through having instead of just giving all apps access to everything, we have this iterative model where there's web apps which are pretty untrusted, and you can pretty much just install those as if you could navigate to a web security impact. And then we have the privileged apps which are a bit more powerful, but then they also need to go through a review. And then we have the certified apps which are completely trusted, but they're developed only by the people, the OEM, basically, or Mozilla. And then currently the review process is fairly manual, but we're, I guess, ramping up with more automated stuff in the future. And then finally, the last challenge that I'm here to talk to all of you about is how to get involved. So there's heaps of ways you can get involved in Firefox OS. It's a completely open project, like everything at Mozilla. If you're a developer, there's 1,000 different things you can work on, from everything from Gaia, developing apps, down to Gecko, or even like the lower layer. If you're a security person, if you like testing, and especially if you're interested in like web, like especially client-side sort of stuff, I'd really encourage you to get involved, because there's some really interesting challenges and there's some really interesting testing problems. The security reviews at Firefox, at Mozilla are open. You can, the results are published online. You can come and get involved. I generally, if you join the Dev B2G list, I generally announce when these reviews are coming up, and everyone's free to get involved. And I would encourage people. We've already had a few people contributing from the community, so that's been really great. And then there's probably a lot of other ways you can get involved as well. So come join us on #B2G on IRC, or there's the mailing list, which is Dev B2G. And that's about all I have. Any questions?
Actually, coming with manufacturers, Samsung, have you maybe shaped? I mean, it's going to come like Android OS with Samsung, with
So I think you're asking me, is it going to be branded and customized based on?
Years ago, when I bought the first Android Galaxy, actually I found out that it was not really easy software somehow, because I didn't have good access and I had to do the routing process to actually make it work.
Sure.
So you said something very interesting. It's what do? You provide the root access to the user, so actually you just put about here. What do we have to do to make a routing process the same that with Android? I mean, that's how will it come to the user? Or that would be probably better that two kind of presentations come. I can open hardware or the phone, develop it in one of comes, or actually how do I deal with that? Because
Yeah, it's a big challenge, but I think first of all, I think the question is, pardon? Yeah, yeah. So the question, if I understand it, is how do we avoid the situation where you think you're buying an Android phone, but what you really get is a very OEM or things like that, and how do you get control over it? That's definitely a challenge in this space because mobile OEMs are used to working in a particular way. We've been working quite hard with OEMs to try and get them to understand, to move more towards an open point of view, and so far it's been quite positive. In terms of having like customizations, because the apps themselves, the certified apps that go on the phone are developed entirely by Mozilla. There aren't actually third-party certified apps at the moment. I don't know, I can't speak to contractual or anything like that, but at the moment, the phones generally ship with maybe some extra apps, but in general, that's the only customization. And we do certification to ensure that the OEM hasn't added, secret APIs or things like that, so that it still remains true to the web and Firefox, I guess. So that's probably the main focus there.
would you want them to get a phone rooted by Delta Force?
So the developer devices are like that. Personally, I would like us not to have to do that. I would like us to be able to provide a phone. Well, if you're a developer, fine. But there's been some discussions very recently. Actually, you can go and look on B2G this week. We've had some very spirited discussions about what a device should be. But to me, that's unnecessary to support developer use cases. I'd like us to be able to and in a sense, most of our early users are probably going to be fairly that sort of power user developer sort of person, but they also want to just have a phone that is secure, and if they lose their phone, it's not rooted and people can't just steal all their data. So there's a few ways we can approach that. So one is having maybe the phone isn't rooted, but it has all the power that you need to install the apps and change apps and stuff like that. So that's exactly where we end up there. Will depend on the tools that are available, and also where the developer needs go, I think, as well. But my job is security, so it's a very fine line between making things safe because the average user, they're never going to turn on debugging and these advanced features, and they should still be safe, right? That's really important. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yep.
And you were talking about review process.
Yep.
Is it strict offers? I guess there will be a lot of applications made by people who work on the ground in mobile development. You will be surprised to see application which is made with review and the type of plugins which drains the battery power. So it's kind of works.
Yeah.
It's what we see now is from that.
So I think your question is, are they reviewed just for security or are they reviewed for quality as well? They're definitely reviewed for quality. Is it a guarantee that they're not going to drain your battery? Probably not. That's the whole point, I guess, of the the feedback system in the marketplace. Is if you install an app and it drains your battery in an hour or something, there's a feedback system to try and people can warn other users about that. Really, we're a smaller player in the space, and we need to leverage the community. So our solutions to those kind of challenges will be community-based problems. Community-based solutions. So the reviewers are actually volunteers for the most part. We have internal reviewers as well, but in the same way that the add-ons work for Firefox, we're basically running the same style of program. So that is, there is a volunteer process. People become more and more trusted reviewers as they spend more time with the program, as they work more closely with us. And then we ensure quality by making sure that the more trusted reviewers get a look across these apps, that sort of thing. So But yeah, there at the moment there's quality things like, one of the initial problems is people just putting the manifest file on a regular website that's meant for desktop. If you run an app like that, a lot of times developers forget there's no back button, and you end up at the end of the bottom of a tree of links, and you can't get back. So that's an instant basically fail from a review perspective. So there are things like that where some apps will need to be modified. Although we actually have some tools that help with that as well. So yeah, does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? Nope. Okay, thanks very much. With any luck.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Merci, Mozilla, de nous avoir accueillis. Sorry, this is a few slides in French. Just to say, l'OWASP Top 10 est traduit. Merci à ceux qui ont participé, qui sont dans la salle. On a sorti 15 jours après la sortie officielle. Donc c'est plutôt un pari réussi. Comme l'a dit Michael, il y a des élections au board. Ludovic Petit du chapter France candidate. Donc pour ceux qui sont membres, n'hésitez pas à voter peut-être pour lui, qui va mettre un petit peu plus d'Europe dans le board, même s'il y a déjà quelques Européens. Juste 4 projets pour en parler, il fallait prendre quelque chose. J'aurais bien aimé que Simon Bennett puisse parler de Zap Proxy quelques minutes, mais je pense qu'il a eu des petites obligations familiales. Donc il y a une nouvelle version du Zap Proxy qui est sortie avec des scripts, il est scriptable, donc je vous encourage à le regarder. C'est l'un des projets les plus actifs aujourd'hui. Pour ceux qui connaissent les cartes de Microsoft sur la SDL, sur le jeu pour le threat modeling de chez Microsoft, il y a un projet qui s'appelle le Cornucopia, qui est un peu le même style, donc vous pouvez regarder. Il y a l'OWASP Java HTML Sanitizer Project qui vient d'un peu d'être mis à jour il y a quelques temps, qui vaut le coup d'être regardé parce qu'on continue à toujours parler un petit peu plus des injections dans les navigateurs. On peut voir que c'est un peu aujourd'hui quand même un endroit important des attaques. Et puis pour ceux qui utilisent le SAPI, alors je ne sais pas s'il y en a dans la salle, je connais certains Français qui l'ont inclus dans leur logiciel. Il y a un bug qui est sorti, qui a été noté sur les modules crypto, donc je vous encourage à mettre à jour votre version de l'ES-API. Sinon, comme d'habitude, vous connaissez les guides. Les 3 prochaines conférences importantes, il y a la Brucon à Gand en Belgique à la fin du mois, l'AppSec USC à New York. Alors pour ceux qui n'ont jamais fait d'AppSec, en plus c'est à New York, c'est vachement bien, je vous encourage à y aller. C'est un peu pour ceux qui connaissent la Black Hat sur le même modèle, 1 ou 2 jours de training et puis derrière 1 à 2 jours de conférence. Voilà. Je vais laisser Ludovic parler un peu rapidement des élections. On cherche une salle et un speaker pour novembre. Voilà. Proposition. Chose à proposer. Si on le fait pas en novembre, on le fera peut-être en décembre. En novembre, parce que octobre. Comme d'habitude, mon commercial sur un sujet d'AppSec. Voilà, en français ou en anglais. Après, les autres langues, on aura du mal. Voilà. Merci, Ludo.
Well, I will do it in English to be fair with our host, it will be clean as well. I am Ludovic, so chapter lead with Sébastien in France. Just a couple of words coming back to what Michael said and introduction about the election. Feel free to contribute to this election. This is one way to spread your voice within the OWASP ecosystem. I'm candidate to the board, but part of this, being part of a community is a great chance, especially in OWASP, because we are working in a completely open way. Feel free to ping us, either the board members, the chapter leads, either or other people, not strictly part of the community, but interested to do this, because the more interactivity we will have, the more powerful the voice of OWASP will spread. And this is a great chance to have people such as Michael and the Mozilla staff part of the ecosystem as well. So the living force is you. We are the force of the living force of the foundations. This is the spirit, the mindset of an open community. So feel free to contribute or just take a look at the election to the board of the OWASP Foundation. You have great peoples. Even if you don't vote for me, it's not a problem. The problem isn't there. The problem is to spread your voice. What you would like to see from the trenches to the board, and vice versa. The more exchange we will foster, the more efficient we will be in such a community. Last thing that I was saying, Sebastian, is about places that could host some chapter meeting in Paris. Just remember simple things. Being a member is just a mindset. For a company, it's a bit more expensive, I would say. It's $5,000 nowadays. But in France, you have to keep in mind that this is 60% of this, it's tax-free. Okay? So the investment in brackets to the foundation, if you wish to become a corporate member, is already gain, I would say, because the price is very low compared to the huge knowledge activities and the feedback you could have with the OWASP as well. Okay, so feel free to either ping Sebastian, me, or other people within the community in order to have more information about how to become a member. Last thing is about to contribute to the project. As I say, the OWASP is an open community, and the more projects we will have, the more efficiency within the community, once again, we could foster. You can open a project, ask for a project, contribute for it, so feel free to do this. There is an important project, the mobile security one. Initially, a couple of fellows, we decided to dive into the arena to start working on this, and little by little this project's growth. This is a huge project nowadays, but we need contributors. In this one, of course, but there is 140 different projects roughly currently running within the foundation, so feel free to dive into it or to ask for it. Okay? That's it for me. Master, if you want to close the meeting, it was an honor to be here at Mozilla. And once again, thanks to Michael and to Mozilla staff, because they are great guys. Okay? Thank you.
Well, I really don't have too much else to say. I just really want to thank everyone that came here today. Thanks so much for OWASP Paris for helping set this up, Ivan for helping set this up. Oh yes. So another note on the OWASP board elections. So when you're looking to find out more about who these people are, there's actually 15 people running, first of all, and that's awesome. When you have an organization that has evolved to the point where there's a bunch of people that want to compete and contribute, that is a really good situation. So 15 people from around the world. How do you figure out who they are? There are texts about who they are, what they want to do with OWASP. There are interviews done over questions, so you can just read them. There's also audio interviews where everybody answered the same questions that were submitted by the community. So those are now online. You can find them on the OWASP blog or the election page. So you can learn a heck of a lot about all of us. There's even a interactive town hall Q&A coming up in the next week or two. We'll have to check our calendars. But that is online as well. But anyways, just to wrap it up, I really want to say thanks to everybody who came here. You know, OWASP is what it is because of the community. So it's great to have you all here. Wonderful job. cultivating this great group. And we're all going to stay around for a little bit, have a chat about whatever's on your mind. So please do feel free to ping any of us here. Thanks again.